Chaos. Woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning, chilling with coffee mugs, me and coffee chugs, talking education all across the nation, pushing boundaries, thinking innovation. Chaos.
Hello, everyone. How you doing? Welcome to another episode on Living on the Edge of Chaos podcast. This is an exciting episode for me, bringing back some guests in this little kind of, I'm going to call it, it's in my brain, it's a mini series of guests who I think continue to make me think about not just AI, but how we process learning, teaching, the world, society, what to make sense of everything. And these two awesome guests were on my show a little over a year ago, and I've continued to follow their work. And so what I have found is there are people who I think are definitely like signals among the noise. And I would hold both Jessica and Kimberly on the show here today to be two of those people who continue to share thoughts, ideas, and move and navigate in ways of just trying to make sense of what's best of everything. And so this episode here is to bring these awesome voices back to the show. If you haven't listened to the first episode, it'll be linked in the show notes. But I'll have them introduce themselves here in a minute. But really, it's just to revisit our own learning journey. Something that I intentionally am trying to do is be more transparent in my journey, looking at as I shift my thinking. It doesn't mean that I was wrong before. It just means I continue to learn. And so, how do I pivot and navigate? And so, bringing back two guests that I think are doing similar things in their own journey. So, Jessica, Kimberly, both of you, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have an opportunity to speak with you. More importantly, selfishly learn from you. But let's start with introductions for those that don't know who you are, haven't heard the previous podcast, or Kimberly, I know you've done other work and jumped in on some other kind of projects that I've done with schools and teachers. Who are you? What do you do? And what in the world do you got going on? And I will how about we just pick you? Kimberly, you look like you're ready to roll, so I'm going to pick you.
I was just gonna tag Jessica. Hey everybody, I'm Kimberly Becker, and Aaron and I were just chatting about how we both are Iowans. I didn't grow up here. I grew up in the South in Mississippi, but I am primarily identifying myself as a linguist right now, interested in tech. And because I'm kind of in an identity crisis of sorts about who I am. I have a PhD in applied linguistics and technology, and I've always worked in academia until I met Jessica. She and I went out on a business venture, founded a company. So I did that for a couple of years, and now I am working in the marketing space, very far outside academia. Um, and just learning and growing and yeah, but very active on LinkedIn, in kind of the science communication research. I love to share. I love to share about research. I love to read research. I don't know that I love to write it, but Jessica is encouraging me to sort of get back into that. So yeah, that's me.
I am Jessica Parker. I live in North Carolina, and I always struggle to describe myself because I am interested in so many things. Like, I'm an entrepreneur. I've had 4 or 5 businesses now, including the ed tech AI startup that Kimberly and I ran together. Um, so when Moxie shut down, I just went back to running my other businesses. But I'm also an academic. I supervise doctoral students. I'm a researcher. I started out doing clinical healthcare research years ago and transitioned into consulting. And that's just kind of evolved as my interest evolved. I still love doing research. I was just texting Kimberly this morning. I'm ready to do another corpus study. I like studying corpora because we don't have to go through human subjects recruitment and IRB. But yeah, I think Kimberly and I both met through a separate business, an academic writing center that I was trying to get off the ground about 5 years ago. And we were working together closely on that business. And then ChatGPT came out, and we both started doing research on it. And that's what kind of sparked the founding of Moxie, which has since shut down since we last talked to you, Aaron. So I'm sure we'll get into some of that today. But yeah, I kind of do a lot of things. I think of myself as like a dreamer and a doer.
Yeah, well, I love it. And I was going back and just looking at the show notes and all the things from the first time I had you guys on the podcast. And I think it's so fitting that here we are, about a year and a half ish later. And the title of that podcast was The Importance of Good Writing, Curiosity, Bravery, and the Process of Living. And so much has shifted. And so I know for me, I loved all the work that you were producing through Moxie and the ideas and trying to help people see the possibilities of in this landscape of AI, there could still be a high quality academic learning and writing, even with the leveraging of AI. And I know there is much more that comes within that, but in a general sense. And what I loved about it was trying to help K-12 educators see, like, hey, if this can happen at an academic PD type writing of dissertation, there's entry points for what we can do at a high school, junior high aspect. That's how I leverage a lot of the work within there. And so, not to get into like why Moxie doesn't isn't in existence anymore, but maybe talk a little bit about from that, like what has shifted? What have you guys noticed in the landscape as you were getting Moxie going? You're producing incredible work. It's no longer here, but just in the general sense, what are thoughts and ideas that have moved and grooved? I think about that last part of the podcast title, the process of living. You have had to pivot. You've had to navigate. It doesn't mean the work wasn't valid, important, still extremely influential, but we've had to pivot like I think everybody has had to do, which seems almost on a daily basis anymore. Talk a little bit about maybe some of those insights or ahas, because I think that's such an important thing for so many people to hear.
Yeah, and we're not afraid to talk about, we don't mind talking about, the shutting down of Moxie. We, like you just said, we certainly don't see it as a failure, but we have definitely done almost a 180, I'd say. It's interesting. I had a talk with faculty and program directors and students at a university in Boston last week, and they wanted me to come in and talk about some of the things I talked about last year. And I feel so much differently about AI. We've learned so much. And ultimately, I can boil it down to sort of one key like takeaway or principle, which is that toward the end of Moxie, Kimberly and I realized it became very clear that in order for Moxie to perform at the level we felt was necessary for the high stakes research that people were using it for, that we needed to bring in some more traditional software components, which were very expensive. And then we also didn't really know if that was going to move the needle. So like trying to justify several $1 million of an investment when we weren't sure if it was actually going to make a considerable improvement in the use case, we just couldn't justify it. And that sort of thinking has continued where we're now, because we don't have a company to think about, we have more time and space to, I think, use this technology in a much, much more critical way. And so I have a lot more concerns than I had whenever we were building Moxie. And I'm really grateful for that sort of evolution of thinking. I don't know that I could have landed where I am if we hadn't been through the whole hype cycle and really bought into the razzle and dazzle of the magic of large language models. Like I feel like we had to go through that to land where we are, which is in a much more skeptical, critical place.
Mm.
Yeah, we were in a tough spot because we couldn't be critical and also promote our product, and we couldn't not promote our product. um, but we couldn't make it as good as we wanted it to be without including, like she said, kind of building in a pipeline of more traditional rule-based kind of structures that give it a little more boundaries, because the main problem with generative AI, and maybe this, I'd love to hear like kind of what piece of it um, gets you thinking critically, Aaron, in the K-12 space, is you can't reliably reproduce really anything with it. And so you may get 7 great answers, and how do you optimize that? And we were working with novice researchers, like, an expert could really quickly or more quickly drill down on which piece of that is the most optimized answer or the best choice in that scenario. And it just became really clear that as novices, if you're not an expert, and we also have a podcast called Women Talking About AI, and
Mhm.
recently we interviewed a neuro specialist. She has a PhD in neuroscience. I don't know exactly how she identifies herself. I can't remember. But anyway, she said, you can't think critically about something unless you are already an expert, unless you have some level of expertise. So you can't be, and I think what Jessica and I did, it was like we would often say we're building the plane while we're flying it. There came a point where we were experts enough to think critically enough to say, oh, whoa, wait, hold up. And then the expense of making it what we really wanted it to be was so great and really just completely unsustainable. And
Sure.
that's how we closed.
So as you guys started to become more skeptical, Jessica, I think as you kind of talked about it, I mean, were there like certain moments, whether in the journey of Moxie or just in the journey of the I call it chaos because there's just so much in there. I mean, there are people who think everything is great and promote all the things. There are those that think it is the end of all humanity. And there are people in the middle that are trying to jostle. And it's not for me to say anyone's right or wrong because I've come to the conclusion that I don't even know. I don't even know what's up or down anymore. But I just know that there's just a lot in there. And how did you start to shift? Because I think one, that vulnerability, right? Like, I mean, even Kimberly, you talked about it. You have a company and you can't come out and be necessarily like critical all day, every day, because that's not good for people to want to use the tools. But at the same time, I know you both have a good enough moral compass, a strong moral compass. You're not going to overpromise on what it can do. And so it does create a friction. But what were some of those things? Because I find myself becoming more and more skeptical. I find myself in more of my learning sessions and things that I'm sharing, things in my newsletter, it has moved to a more of like, hold up. And I also still get really excited with all updates, if that makes sense. Like I'm in this ambiguous state where I'm like, ooh, new shiny toy object. And then but I'm now more sensitive to calibrating and going like, but what does this really mean for humanity? What does this really mean for our attention span? What does this mean for how we're leveraging tools? But I still get excited. I'm just also noticing I'm way more cautious on what I share or promote or tell people. I'm curious for you, were those big moments or just like a slow drag towards skepticism? Um, just curious how you guys have continued to navigate through that.
Yeah, I think for me, like the skepticism definitely started to bubble up the more technical knowledge Kimberly and I developed through building Moxie. Like in the beginning, we were very naive. I think naivete is a good thing for an entrepreneur because if you know what it's going to take to build something, you probably wouldn't be as keen on building it. But we definitely started as like truly non-technical founders. And toward the end, because we, of course, were much involved in the building of Moxie, we learned a lot. Certainly wouldn't consider myself technical, but it became much clearer what the trade-offs were and what the risks were the more that we got involved in the building of it and the trying to improve it and realizing how limited we were just using the API with an LLM. But then once I had the space to not, I mean, we were so consumed with the day to day of the business. We were so small. We didn't have a large team. Kimberly and I were wearing 18 different hats. So when it was like the pressure of all that went away and I actually had time to think and take a minute, I then started reading about other paths that exist that excite me and really started questioning this whole premise of the big tech AI industry, which is around scale and artificial general intelligence. And seeing that there are other paths that exist that are more community driven, small language models that don't eat up as many resources, but are more domain specific. So they're not generalist, they're domain specific. So use it for a language or for pharmacy reasons, pharmacology or medical diagnostics. And those types of domain-specific smaller models not only work better for the use case, but they require far less resources. And all of the concerns around the environment and the data annotation industry are still there, but you don't need that scale. Like, do we need AGI? Do we need a large language model like what we have with ChatGPT to get some of the benefits? And the answer is no, we don't. But the reality is there's been so much money pumped into big tech now with AI that we kind of can't go back. It feels like, and I say we is like the collective we as a society, venture capital, private equity, the government, they've invested in NVIDIA. It's just kind of scary to think that we have this now behemoth of like a machine that all this money is funneling into, but yet there are really great case studies that show that we don't need that. And that has become very clear. And I don't know what to do about it. I don't have any sort of solution to propose, but that just sort of skepticism and awareness has really come full circle lately.
Yeah, I think for me, something that I've been trying to, maybe it's just more of my own learning journey when I get past like the surface level use of large language models. And by surface level, like the day-to-day prompts, maybe trying to like sort or organize my scattered thoughts, or a sounding board to like rewrite a sentence. I mean, the kind of the basic things that I think a lot of people are using. And I know there's lots of research that show, people using for therapy and companionship. I'm just talking, so I want to like make sure I'm specific and say like just the general day-to-day use of just kind of like how I kind of prompt these large language models. And as I get more and more into it and be like, okay, what does this mean for workflow? Can I actually leverage these tools to be better in certain workflows, or can I have it do these things that take me forever to do at a faster rate? I find that I start to find more and more flaws. I find that there's more actual bottlenecks. And so a lot of like the hype cycle, if you really spend time trying to dig down into it, like I find myself frustrated. And so my skepticism comes from this like, okay, yes, it can do some of these things very quickly if I want to spit out surface level work, but if I really want to get into the deeper levels, it doesn't mean that it's not going to get there, because I know there are updates all the time. But I think for me, the frustration is now like, okay, how do I do stack this, and this to get this thing done? Because it doesn't necessarily require, like Aaron's eyes on it, so to speak, right? It's more like a logistical back end, and it can't do that. And that is where I get frustrated. And then I start to learn why it doesn't work. And then I get into like all these new researches about the very interesting ways in which they program and learn, and the scheming. And I'm like, man, there's so many more things than when I used to tell people like, yeah, there's bias, and bias is still vitally important to discuss. Don't get me wrong. But I'm like, there's like 5 other things that we need to be aware of if we're leveraging this in our day-to-day lives. And so now it's just like, what do I do with this? Like I don't want to be the negative Nelly, but
Um,
it's not all that it's cracked up to be. And I still use it all the time. Like, and it's a weird space that I find myself sitting in.
Well, I think, sorry, and I tend to like just talk, so
No.
I really
Well,
feel
that I'm just word vomiting, so here we are.
free to jump in. I think that I don't know, it's like I have different thoughts from a learning perspective and then just from someone using it, because I still use it even though I have all these doubts. But I'm not using it really for learning in the way that we were talking about having people use it for with
Right.
Moxie. And so when I talk to students now, I've really shifted my language around. Don't go into this thinking that it's going to save you a bunch of time. I don't think that that's true. I actually think it's more time consuming because you have to double check everything, and it looks so good. It can really come across as accurate when it's not. And most students don't have the bandwidth or the training to interrogate the language itself. Like, I've learned so much through Kimberly as a linguist. I didn't have those language skills to recognize the nuances and the shifts in meaning and the granularity changes. So most students don't have that. Most professors I know don't even have that training. So I don't think most of us are equipped to engage with it critically enough. And then once you do that, it sort of offsets whatever intention you had in using it in the first place, which for most people is like thinking that it's going to save time, or make them more productive in some way. And so the benefits for learning, I'm much more skeptical about, because the system of learning is still the same. The incentives are not still where they need to be if we really want students to be motivated to learn. So I think until that system is completely rethought, like it's just not going to do what we're all saying we think it will do in a learning context. It doesn't mean that students shouldn't understand how it works, but in terms of like, do I really think a chatbot is going to solve Bloom's Two Sigma problem? No, I don't
Right.
anymore.
Yeah, it makes me think about when we talk about AI, we don't always talk about it necessarily like domain specific in terms of like the AI use, right? And I'm now reflecting out loud about my approaches where there is like a lane to think about productivity. There is a lane to think about teaching and learning. There is a lane about professional use. And I've been thinking, I mean, at the time of this recording, Sora 2 is coming out, catching all the buzz, right? There's just AI video generation, which doesn't really apply to any of those categories, but what it's going to do is massively consume time, right? It is going to be yet another distractor um, amongst all the platforms of, kind of pick your delight or poison, however you see it. Um, and just thinking about how do we think more intentionally through those domains or categories, because I think they kind of just all get garbled up because AI can kind of do all of it, right? So we just kind of I bounce around and go, oh, boo, 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 and not really like laser focus, as much as maybe we should. And even within those, you could have varying opinions in terms of what you think about the AI use.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it certainly doesn't mean that it's not useful, because I find it useful. But yeah, I just think we all need to really question, um, what I think about the trade-offs all the time. What is the trade-off you're making? Because you are making one, whether you realize it or not.
Sure. Kimberly, you look like you are stewing
I
on
was,
some thoughts here.
yeah, well, I mean, I was just trying to think, rack my brain, like you asked about kind of what were the benchmarks of like when we knew. And I think one major, Jessica mentioned like the difficulty of working with the application interface, like an API. So for those of you who don't know, because I didn't know this when we started, when you have an AI company that does a certain thing, what you're basically doing is layering your prompt on on top of a language model, and the user is sort of getting first, it's going through your prompt to the language model. That's what an API does. It has this layered effect of kind of boundarying what the model can do. And that was a big argument we were making about how if you put boundaries on it, it's safer. Our product did not write for the student. It would, kind of Socratically question them or point them in a direction of a certain theoretical framework, or whatever it was like. And I don't mean theoretical framework in terms of the science. I mean like a more like a heuristic, an educational framework for
Yep.
research writing, good writing practices, good feedback practices, that kind of thing. And we could not get users to understand, no matter how many disclaimers we made, that Moxie was not connected to a research database. And so they would continually use it to sort of mine for research, because that's what novices are doing. They're trying to find how their ideas align with the conversation that's already happening. And no matter how many times we would still get the feedback, well, like, it's still hallucinating sources. And we would say, yes, we know this. This is not, did you read the red, bright, flashing writing on the interface that says Moxie is not connected to Google Scholar and it cannot generate, it was basic AI literacy was a holdup. So I just wanted to throw that out there, because I think people, and I face that now in my job, because it's So I work for a nonprofit that it's a continuing care retirement community, and I do the marketing for them. And so they have a large language model. I think it's some form of an API. It's Gemini, and it's somehow more HIPAA compliant than just a bare facing Gemini. I haven't really worked with Gemini a whole lot. I mean, I'm certainly familiar with it as a language model, but I don't know. And what I find is that just like our API did not do what it would do if you went directly to the model, be it ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, any of them, theirs does not do. And I cannot get it to do even simple things. So if we layer on, and this gets back to the domain specificity, like in the healthcare field, you've got HIPAA compliances. In education, you've got like FERPA issues. When you have these regulations layered on top of APIs connected to 3 different companies with different rules and back end, I'm like, that's a lot of stuff that's really filtering through, and you're not getting a pure, even it's a prediction, right? Like everything you get out of a language model is a predicted piece of text. It's not a pure prediction because it's got these layers of things that other people have added on. And I don't think anybody has any idea about
Right.
that.
Yeah.
The way
That's
it was,
fascinating.
if
That is.
they just told me like don't use ChatGPT because I said I'm a huge user of AI. What are the rules? I want to follow the rules. And they said, here's this Gemini product. It is a safe version of ChatGPT. I mean, that's what they told me when I
Yeah.
came here. People are very
Yeah. It's interesting. I do some outside work with some companies, and one of them is using, or two of them use Microsoft Copilot. Everything's within their Microsoft ecosystem. And so it is, as you're leveraging Copilot within their infrastructure, it is safe. Like their proprietary information, the data doesn't move into Copilot for the training model like if they were to prompt ChatGPT. But just like you said, even though it's promoted as Copilot and all the things, you can't do the same thing if I were to just go to like my personal Copilot or I go to ChatGPT, it would do it. And here, but because of the data and the sensitivity, so there is this interesting space, um, and I don't know enough of like the IT backend to be able to I can show them the graphic that shows how Microsoft explains it, but that's the extent of what it means to me as we go through that. But it is very fascinating, yeah, because it sounds like it's a very similar approach with Gemini. Probably their enterprise, their education type system that keeps the stuff out, but you call it a downside. It's an upside and downside. One, the information stays out, but the downside is it does limit the applications as you think about it.
I
For
actually think
sure.
it makes it hallucinate more.
Mm,
I
Well,
that's
I think that,
fascinating.
I mean, when you think about, I like to think about things now in terms of motivation. Like one of the reasons that OpenAI, Anthropic, Google allow APIs is because for a business case, businesses want to white label their products. Like with Moxie, we were white labeled. We put the Moxie brand on top of a layer that connected to any of those models. So there's a great enterprise business case for the API, but the functionality doesn't transmit because you have a different user interface than what you go when you see ChatGPT. I think there's also, speaking of just the business case, something interesting I was reading this morning that goes back to Moxie, and what I think most people, especially educators, don't realize is the business case of this in terms of tokens. Like I was just reading how difficult it is. Like there was a report that came out about Anthropic, even GitHub's Copilot coder, about how much money they're losing per user despite the limits. And we had that issue too with Moxie, where you're kind of determining how many tokens cost how much, but it's almost impossible to fully enforce it. So, we might have some users paying $9 a month at Moxie, but spending $80 of tokens that we would then pay for. So we were hemorrhaging money. Like,
Yeah,
it was really hard. And Anthropic even released something saying that there was one user who had racked up like a $50,000 token bill and they were unable to enforce the $200 like pro user limit. And so I think what most educators don't realize, and especially in a learning environment, it's inherently going to be very token intensive because of trial and error. You know, a student is going to be going through the same task again and again to learn, and that costs a lot of money. Someone is paying for that, whether it be the school system paying that bill, Microsoft paying that bill, the environment is paying that bill, so we're collectively paying it. And so that has just really helped to me really see the trade-off as well, that we could not figure out with Moxie. Like, we had a really hard time making the business model work. We were charging $59 a month, and a lot of people complained about that because they'd say, oh, well, I can go get free use at ChatGPT. I'm like, but it's not free. Like, it's
Right.
not. It's not. Nothing is free.
Correct.
In fact, this technology is very, very costly, extremely costly. And I don't know that the cost is worth some of what we're getting from it right now.
Yeah. So thinking about all of this and these ideas that I think hopefully as the people are listening are starting to like, I didn't think about, I haven't thought about this. Like, and that's, so I appreciate you guys sharing the journey and the story and the ideas, but I know, like, for me, I'm going to finish this podcast. And even though I'm going to continue to chew on these thoughts, I'm still going to use AI. Like, I know I'm still going to turn around and probably use it 15 minutes after this call for whatever my task might be. So, with that being said, I like what you said earlier, Jessica, that I mean, I agree. I think I went back and was looking at some like materials I used to share about the idea of like productivity and efficiency. And I don't do that. I still talk about productivity, but I don't use like these stats and things that were promoted in the K-12 space about saving time. I just don't see it. However, I do find that there are good productivity flows, things that do actually help me like in my operation. So I am curious from both of you, if you have it, like, what are some of your workflows? And the reason I'm asking this is I've been asking some recent guests this because I think it is helpful for people to hear how people are thinking about the insertion of AI, because I think for a lot of people, even though it's been 3 years since ChatGPT has kind of hit the scene, I still go into a lot of places and the majority of people have never used a large language model. Period. Like, there are still huge swaths of people. So for them to even think about prompting as cognitive overload in and of itself, to even like this concept of like typing words and getting words back from an algorithm that is not human but sounds human, and that just entry point there. But people need to hear like, okay, so what do I do besides prompting about what to make for dinner tonight or how to write a rubric for a classroom? Do you guys have, like, in your like day-to-day operations, how do you insert AI if there's just like as simple or as complex as it might be? Because I think these examples really do help people think about context in ways that they just can't see it yet. And if you need a
Yeah.
minute to think on it, I know that's kind of like I didn't prep you to think about your workflow, but
I mean, the basic framework that I use professionally and I tell my students to use is called the AI sandwich.
mm,
And it's where I do have a workflow, I have a habit where I go straight into the AI to brainstorm and ideate. So even if it's a Substack or it's a podcast or it's a research article, I usually do some additional ideating. And what that looks like for me is like really thinking about my argument. What is the purpose of this? What am I trying to communicate? And who's my audience? And I'll get that clear through brainstorming with the AI. And then I do the bulk of the work. So the human with the AI sandwich, it's like AI is the top bun and the bottom bun, and the human is in the middle. But then I go off and do a bulk of the work on my own. I'll get the draft ready without the help of AI because I need to do that to think through. Like, writing is thinking. And then I'll come back to the AI, usually for some sort of validation. I'll ask for feedback. I'll ask it to double check something, proofread. But that's the basic flow. But sometimes that changes based on the stakes. Like, if it's something that's a lot higher stakes, like research, for example, I'm really trying to rely on it less because I just find that that offloading isn't really appropriate for those types of higher stakes tasks. I'll give a simple example of that. Like I was working with a client who was using Copilot to do her G-power analysis. For those of you who aren't researchers, a G-power is just a way that you estimate how big your sample needs to be in order to claim statistical significance. So when you're doing an experimental study, how many people do I need to recruit? How many should I consider based on an assumption of like 20% attrition? So anyways, G-Power is free. You download it, you type it in. I don't know why you would use Copilot or ChatGPT. But yeah, it gave her some bogus number. And I said, well, why are you using that? G-Power is free. And the calculator created on the screen for Copilot looked just like G-Power. It was really interesting. And I was just like, listen, the way you're using it, just use that knowledge to plug in the numbers to the real software platform that we know is accurate. And she was just blown away by that. So that's like an example of like, I need there to be accuracy and precision every time when I'm doing a power analysis. I'm not going to use a large language model for that. And that's basic AI literacy. They're prediction machines. They're not calculators.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah.
That AI sandwich, I always tell people, because I was one of the first. Well, we made a visual with a sandwich, and it just has gone like totally viral.
Simplest thing we've ever done.
It's the simplest. I mean, we made it in Canva, 2 pieces of bread, but you can invert it too if you have students who are needing to, I will often tell people the bread on the sandwich can be AI, it can be AI, start it with AI, fiddle with it with a human, do most of the bulk of the work there, just like that's the meat of the sandwich, and then finalize it with AI. Or you can invert that and start with a human, and then either way I think the metaphor works. But yeah, I'll just say my husband's a public school teacher, and he was not sold on it. He was very skeptical. He's a kind of non-techie guy. He never is. He's not interested in tech like I am. And so when it first came out, he wanted to know how to use it, what I would suggest. And so we brainstormed a little bit, but at the time I was so engrossed in Moxie, I didn't really have, and I'm not a K-12 person, so I didn't know, how to, and so over time, he's continued to play with it. First of all, he recognizes now that he wants to use the premium, the one you pay for. It's better. He likes the results he gets. So that's been an interesting kind of change to watch in his acceptance of it. And now what I can tell you is that he started off using it for things like rubrics and assessments and generating new multiple choice items and that kind of process. And now what he does is he doesn't use it for any assessment at all. He uses it, he teaches high school science, and he loves readers theater. So if you're not familiar with readers theater, you give the students a different role to play, and they learn through the story that they are acting out in the theater of the classroom. He uses it to generate scripts. So he gives it his materials, because that takes forever as a teacher to write out a play of sorts that your students would put on. So he has found endless ability to change up an old script, create a totally new one, change the script to fit the interests of his students in his classroom. No more assessment, and certainly no more multiple choice. He quickly saw that is a hard fight uphill with an LLM. It will totally get you sidetracked, and
right.
it just not a good plan. But so that I have watched him do that as a teacher. It's been really interesting to watch how he's really shifted. But what I was going to say, and I have been saying this forever, is that generative AI undersells what this can do, because it sets you up to think all it does is just generate writing and generate text. And yes, it does, but text is just like a sign, a symbol for what's happening in here in the human brain. It really is just representing something, some process that's happening. And no, it's not a human, and it cannot replicate that. I do not believe that. It's predictive. But when people think of it only as a thing that generates something for them rather than as a co-thought
Mm,
partner, they really get down on it and they say things, especially women, I've noticed, like, I want to keep my own thoughts at the forefront. I don't want to silence myself by inviting another voice into the conversation when I already, in some cases, struggle to know like what I think or what I feel is right. And I really don't want to silence that voice.
hmm,
So that's been an interesting development that I've seen as I've gotten kind of out of academia, where for the most part, people are familiar with it. And there are these people that have never I mean, I had a woman that asked me the other day, what is it? Is it a website? Is it free? Do I have to put my email address in to create an account? Will I
yeah.
know immediately how to use it? You know, these are the kinds of questions that, because she's not working in a company that had any sort of professional development around it. She's not provided it as a stack of tech that she gets, you know, she has no idea. She just
Mm,
really didn't even, she was like, what does it even look like? Like these
yeah.
were the conversations we were having. And this is a person with a master's degree who left teaching and has developed her own kind of company. She's now an entrepreneur. So that's really been interesting. But for
That is.
me, I just make sure to use it for, and I think I talked about this in one of the workshops that I did for you, maybe the community college workshop where I talked
Hmm.
about, you know, there's 3 levels of writing. There's everybody thinks of writing, they think of grammar and syntax and correctness, and that's just the surface level part of writing. And you know what? AI is really good at that. It can answer all your punctuation and grammar questions very, very well. And you don't have to worry about the bias piece of it unless you're looking at like non-standard language forms. And then there's flow, there's how language gets connected. I use it a lot for, well, I don't need it. I mean, humble brag, you know, when you have a PhD in linguistics, you don't need punctuation rules. You kind of, and I've taught writing enough and I've taught those rules and I've learned it through teaching. So I know those things. Now there are some things, like the other day I was writing something about Black women and I didn't know whether B was capitalized. And so there are some things that I'm learning, but I'm not to say that I'm some sort of expert in that, but I will use it for accuracy. I'll use it for flow. Am I connecting these two things? But for depth, that's the third piece of that puzzle of writing. It can't do it. It cannot get into complexity, sophistication, and depth of a human mind because it's too generalized. And when you're writing, it's got to be either personal or it's got to be domain specific, and it's not going to be able to touch that. Now, I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but it can't do it. It just
Yeah.
can't. So I use it for email.
Mm,
Type a bunch of notes that aren't polite or kind or even clear, organized in an email, and click that little magic, you know, in Gmail now you have that magic, it looks like Harry Potter's wand. And you
yeah.
click it and then I click polish and it takes my words and it makes them make sense.
I love it.
That is my,
Yeah.
because yeah, I can't get it to do what I want it to do unless I build an agent, and I don't have time to build an agent.
I find myself using it more and more. My trends have been more on like helping me with like patterns and organization more than creation. And I think for a
Yeah.
long time I was using it like, oh, I can use it to help me create, blog post content or help me create this idea. And now it's more for like helping me like sort this noggin that is not organized. And so just like a quick example on my end, so I put you in the hot seat with that question, like, and for those that have the video, like I have this to-do checklist. And what I did driving home from a workshop I was doing is I just talked to ChatGPT and I was like, here are all the things that I know I have to get done by Friday. Like, help me just, I'm just gonna get you sort it. Like, it's really good at that. And so it chunked it into like 3 domains and then it sorted based on how whatever the algorithms were, what seemed more urgent than what needed to be done by Friday. And then when I got home, I printed it off because I'm still old school. I love notebooks and pens and paper. And now I can take my Sharpie and cross things off. And I was like, this was huge for me where I could sit down. Yes, I could write those things out, but clearly I wasn't doing it, being midway through the week and still feeling stressed over things. And now it's like, oh, it was like by tonight, do this. And, so I'm finding it that, I mean, I know that they're good with patterns, helping me sort patterns of thoughts and ideas and less on this like creation where I think I spent way more time, say like in the last, 2 years leveraging these tools. And so I've noticed that shift in my own workflows with that. So,
Yeah. Jessica,
whatever
talk
that's
about,
worth.
what I heard you say, Aaron, is like this is having an affective contribution to your life. It's like settling you down a little bit about your to-do list. And Jessica and I this
Yeah.
morning were talking about how important motivation and reassurance is. Do you want to talk about that, Jessica, or were you going to say something else?
Yeah, I mean, I told Kimberly this morning, I said, I don't think a lot of people, educators, especially people who are evangelists of AI, want to hear this, but until we see a lot of longitudinal evidence that shows a direct correlation with learning outcomes, I really think that there's more of an indirect benefit, which is the affective component of like motivation, confidence boosting, and through that indirect effect, then yes, we might see improved student learning outcomes. So it's this affective benefit that is really hard to measure. It's the intangible. But that kind of brings me to what I was naturally going to say, which is like, and I don't expect you to answer this. It's just more of a question I've been asking myself lately. The more I learn about the cost, not just the financial cost, but the environmental cost of these tools, is what would I be willing to pay if I had to pay the true cost of this? Because right now, our use of AI is fully subsidized by venture capital and these big tech companies. But if you had to pay the full cost of what that interaction was, if it's $75, would you pay for it? And I just think that's an interesting question that we should really be asking ourselves, because at some point we're going to pay the full cost. I think of Uber, it's not a perfect comparison, but Uber prices in the beginning were so minimal because they were just trying to get free users, as many users as possible. It was subsidized by VC. But now Uber's very expensive, like to the point where I'm like, I'll just drive to the airport and pay for parking if it's only a couple of nights. That day is going to come. And so are we going to all be so addicted to it that we're going to somehow justify that cost? Or is this kind of a ridiculous trade-off? I don't know. Those are just some of the questions I ask myself. Like, are my students learning so much that I could talk them into paying thousands of dollars for this technology? Because I think that's the true cost if you look at what it's costing. And I don't know. So I think that's just like an interesting thing to ponder.
That is a great question. And it has me thinking is I'm just trying to like even be like more financially responsible, which is always a lifelong journey. But I've even noticed take streaming services. I feel like in the last month, they've all incrementally increased cost, right? And now I'm like, I am paying a lot of money in my brain
Yeah.
to be able to watch TV because I like this show here, this show here, this show here. But when I first joined, those weren't the costs, right? And it's just these incremental little nudges. But now, like the budget goes, dude, you're paying a lot to watch TV. What could you be doing with your time? And I think it's a similar kind of parallel move. We're going to see the same thing with these AI platforms. Because you're right. I mean, it's going to be from ChatGPT from $20 a month. It's then at some point going to be 23 or 25. It'll just keep kind of getting you in there, or maybe it'll just jump huge because they just don't care. I don't know what that would be, but it's a fascinating piece because a lot of times I'll hear stuff too where people will ask me about like the energy use, the water use, and I used to kind of just dismiss it. Um, to be honest, I would be like, yeah, that's the reality. And I've spent more time on it, but now my pushback is, okay, so before I answer that question, do you use Facebook? Do you use Instagram? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, so if we're gonna nitpick water and energy use of AI, we need to also make sure we're nitpicking these other platforms that you're on. And we need to have a bigger conversation. So now I've been kind of having this like meta, no pun intended on that crisis of like, maybe I need to get off all these platforms as well, because as I'm thinking about that, I can't pick and choose like when I want to be environmentally friendly. Like
Yeah.
I
We
could, but like that feels like it's such a paradox of like, oh
Yeah.
yes, AI energy use is bad, but let me
Yeah.
post about it on LinkedIn and Facebook, and let me tell you about my thoughts and use the same energy. Like it's just, I don't know, it's crazy.
No, sometimes I feel hypocritical because I use it, but I think we do have the wisdom now that we're on the other side of social media, where I think we can legitimately question, like, what value does this bring to our lives?
Mm, yeah.
Is it worth the cost of the alienation and the isolation we're having as a society, the polarization? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel tied to it because my business is on it and it's a huge lead funnel for my business. Like, I could lose my business if I get off Facebook. So now it's like we're tied to it and addicted to it. And that's objectively the goal of this new technology. And so I do feel like we're in a stage where we're not so far in that we can't be more thoughtful about it. And I'm not saying there's not a use for it, but I don't know that every use case makes sense in terms of what the true cost is. Um, like, if it can do really accurate predictive modeling to make pharmaceuticals cheaper, that's a great use case.
Right.
Societally, we're suffering from that. If it can truly improve learning, then yes, I think that the benefits outweigh the risk. But for many of the use cases that I hear people talking about, including myself, I don't know that I would truly pay the real cost if I had to.
Yeah. I would not pay the true cost to create a to-do list that I could print out
Right.
on my
I don't
printer.
think
I
I would do
mean,
most of what I
I
do.
think I could just take the time to actually sit down and do it. If I had to actually pay what it probably cost for that to be organized for sure.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and just one last thought, and then we'll get to closing thoughts to be respectful of your guys' time. But as you were talking, it reminded me I was listening to a podcast of a gentleman who was talking about he's a podcaster, runs a tech company and writes and all sorts of good stuff. And he was saying that he personally does not use X or Twitter, but he knows that he is losing so much business, but he can't like morally he holds his ground, but he's like he was talking on this podcast about he struggles with it every single day of his life because like his livelihood is dependent on the social media influences and readers and people subscribing to the work. And he said it is like a daily battle. And I'm just like, that wears on you. It wears on you wherever people land and whatever people's thoughts are. It's not this wherever you want to go. That's not to go say X is good or bad or indifferent, but um,
Yeah.
it is. Yeah, we are so intertwined in what it
Mhm.
all means. Or for my mother to see pictures of the grandkids, and I'm like, I could just text them. I don't know why I would need to put it on Facebook, but that's just the modality that we do now, right? And so I don't know
Well,
what that.
things just start to feel inevitable once they're so ubiquitous.
Mm,
And I think that's what I've been questioning lately is like, is this really inevitable? Or like, we do
sure.
actually have a choice. Um, yeah.
Well, you guys have given I mean, as we come to a close here, thank you for your vulnerability and your bravery and sharing these thoughts and posing these questions. I think these are the conversations that more people need to have. And I think just not enough people are having them. I think a lot of people just don't even know how to begin to think about these things because for many, they're still just trying to learn. So it doesn't mean they're not smart enough or not intuitive enough. They're just going like, yeah, like Kimberly, like you're talking about, does it need my email? There are still a lot of people that are in that space to even think about the next steps of what is this 30,000-foot view of all the things we should consider. And so I so value you guys' time to share these things. I think it will lead to new thoughts for definitely for all the listeners. And so I do want to close with if there's any, final thought nuggets that you want to leave for people. You've already dropped quite a few, so you don't have to. And more importantly, if people want to continue to learn more about you and follow you and just hear your thoughts because you both have such great insights into things that I think are definitely helpful for people wherever they are in their journey. So, um, any final thoughts and where they can find you? And I'll let you both kind of share your thoughts there, bring it to a close, and we'll call it a morning.
I want to recommend a book. Um, I recently read The Empire of AI by Karen Howell. I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. She's a journalist, investigative journalist. Very eye opening. backed with a lot of data and evidence, if you like that kind of stuff. I just want to put that out there. That has really helped my thinking evolve. But in terms of finding us, Kimberly and I have a podcast called Women Talking About AI and a Substack called Women Writing About AI. And then we're both on LinkedIn. I'm Jessica L. Parker on LinkedIn. And Kimberly, do you want to add anything?
Well, I'm Kimberly Pace Becker on LinkedIn and pretty much everywhere. Kimberly P. Becker, because there's a lot of Kimberly Beckers in the world. I was just thinking about for educators who, because this has been an interesting shift for me, having been an academic my whole life at a college or a university in my whole career, to then get into business and to have to think about money and to shift the perspective of like making priority workflows based on, is it going to cost the business or is it going to be, really because I never have been motivated by money. And I think it's really important for people in education spaces, nonprofit spaces, and anything that tends to attract people who are not motivated by money, to think about it in a different way. Like, it's not just money, it's resources. And like that question Jessica asked, would you be willing to pay the real price? And like, I was also thinking about, Aaron, what you were saying about your to-do list. Like, if you're not willing to pay the real price and you can't have AI help you navigate that to-do list, well, what does that mean for you? That means you have to say no to things. And accepting that you are going to have to choose, what are you saying no and what are you saying yes to? And not just in terms of financial, but all resources, time, energy, serenity. I think about serenity as like a resource for me because I need to refill my cup. I cannot just be a yes girl because I somehow ended up one. Just that's my natural go-to. But yeah, it's just helpful to think about like, what are you willing to pay for in all the different ways we pay for things? And are you saying yes to too many things? Or because Jessica just wrote a Substack about this, this idea of growth never stops. It never ever stops. And it's just crazy to think that, oh, this is going to give us more time and we're going to be more productive and more efficient. No, you're just going to get a new task.
Yeah. Yeah. This mirage of like, we'll reach so much productivity that we'll have a leisure class. It'll be a 4-day work week. It's never happened. And what do you know? It's not going to happen because that is not the culture and the system that we are in, which prioritizes growth at all costs, no matter what.
Yeah, I love that. I always tell teachers the goal, if we can be more productive, it's not for you to do more work. It's for you to take back that time, hopefully, if anything, on the weekends, for you to do the things to help you find that hobby, to be a human, actually, and not, be, I'm going to say just, I don't mean that as an insult, just a teacher, because there's so many educators that work nights and I mean, everybody does in industry. That's just where I spend time. Like, I want to help you buy back some minutes on your Sunday evening so that you can watch TV or play a board game or read or whatever and not do the work outside of the work hours. So that's so good. Do you guys have time for one last question? Because I have a Sound of Music question that I wrote down that I wanted to make sure I layered in. And so, and if you don't, we can call it here. Okay. All right. I didn't want to leave you hanging with your email request.
Jessica, mute yourself, Jessica. She's not going to have anything to add here.
Oh, she could. I think I have a good one in a way.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to overstep.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the passion for Sound of Music like you, so I'm not going to pretend to be some sort of expert. But I do know that there is a lot of singing and a lot of singing to the children, to teach the children about all the joys of the world. And so my question that I was putting together that is, instead of Maria singing to the children, if AI were to teach us life lessons through song, what would AI's favorite things be?
Validation, for one. It's very sycophantic. It's a brown noser. It loves to validate and tell you you're a genius. And
what's the one phrase? Oh, You had a great graphic that had such a wonderful. Not it wasn't brown noser. Oh man, I got to go back and find it.
Oh,
Yeah.
recently?
In one of our workshops, there was like a way of thinking about AI.
Oh,
I
I
can't
don't
remember if it
know.
was
I
a really
have
clever
so many
one.
graphics. I love making graphics. I'll have to think about it. I don't know, but the confidently wrong, I mean, the fact that of how it is so confidently wrong and it makes you feel so confidently right, but you could be wrong. That is so dangerous in a world where we are already amplifying certainty and shifting the granularity of all nuance beyond what is. I mean, it just blows my mind how boosted everybody's language is. It's great, it's perfect, it's wonderful. It is the answer to all. There's no like gray anymore. We are talking fully in black and white, and that terrifies me. And AI makes I just, Jessica and I are thinking about doing a new study where we look at some of the, how people will say, well, if you use the word delve, it sounds like AI or whatever. Crucial is one that I always pick up on. Well, I've started noticing syntactic patterns like phrases instead of just individual words. And one of the things, and I encourage you all, if you're on social media, to look for this in people's posts, because this is like, for me, like, I don't care who's using generative AI, but like, I always know you're using it. If you get something in your post that says something like, it's not about X, it's about Y, or it's less about A and more about B, or the question is not this. The real question is this other thing. It's this binary, and I'm very, very worried about that. This
Mm.
black and white binary, nothing's in the middle anymore. So that is AI's favorite things. That's my,
I love it.
Yeah, it's contrasting language.
yeah, contrasting language.
I always tell people now the new version of Delve is M dashes. If I see an M dash, I
Yes.
just know. I just like no. I don't even know. I didn't even know what an M dash was. I mean, I know I would read it in books, and now I feel everybody is writing with M dashes, and I'm like,
And I
oh,
love
it
in
just magically appeared, and like I can form a sentence, but I don't think I ever like intentionally used an M dash ever in my life, and now they're everywhere.
Yeah, I use them all the time, and now it's just people think it's right. I love a good M dash, but I've worked in editing, so
Yes, I would say yes. For me, that just spurts random thoughts in my blog. I've never been like, oh, let me type this. Time for an M dash. It's just let me just add another run-on sentence to the other 14 I just wrote. So, oh, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for your time. I do greatly appreciate it, and I know we've definitely run over, but still thought provoking. I appreciate all you do. Continue to do the work, share the ideas and the messages, and continue to make people think and not forget the importance of our own worth as humans and our intelligence, and making sure that we're taking the lead, and finding the proper ways to infuse AI when and if it's definitely needed. So, appreciate you guys.
thank you,
Thanks,
Erin.
Erin. This was fun.
Hey, y'all. Woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning, chilling with coffee mugs, me and coffee chugs, talking education all across the nation, pushing boundaries, thinking innovation. Chaos.